Hey, welcome everybody to another appropriations media briefing on budget issues, financial issues of the Commonwealth. I hope this is a nice little reprieve for the media from Vice President, who's going to be it, our presidential election cycle. So hopefully you enjoy the little break from the campaign season and talk about where we're at financially. We'll go over some numbers where the last fiscal year ended, discuss where we're at financially with this budget, and then moving forward, and then dive into some education, some top-level financial data for the Commonwealth moving forward. So if there's any questions, just do your raise hand function, and we will get to them as soon as questions are available to answer. So we'll start off with where we ended the fiscal year. So if you recall, the budget last year was approved at a $45+ billion budget. The enacted budget, the blue column on the far left, shows 44.86 because of underspending. The supplementals were mostly a negative this year, so it reflected a lower cost, which is really interesting because that red middle column shows how much we actually spended throughout the fiscal year. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but we do not spend all the appropriated budget every single year. We'll get into that in a little more detail later, but state agencies will hold that gap between the 44.86 and the 41.97. They hold on to that number. Ironically, if state agencies and the government would actually rescind their spending, we'd actually be sitting on a surplus this year. So if you look at what we actually spent, 41.97. If you go all the way to the right column, 43.59 is actually how much we brought in revenue minus the refunds. So right there, we could have actually ended on a over $1 billion surplus for this fiscal year. And then the yellow is the revenue estimates for that fiscal year. So that's where we ended. Obviously, because state agencies and the government refused to rescind spending at the end of the fiscal year, we are at the 44.86 on the far left, and then revenues are the green side, the 43.59. So there is a deficit between spending and revenues that was backfilled by one-time surplus dollars. This chart kind of shows you when we bring our money in. So green is revenues, red is expenditures, gray is year-to-date revenues, and then black are year-to-date expenditures. You can see beginning of the fiscal year, there's a gap between spending and revenues. We bring in the bulk of our revenue when income tax comes in March, April timeframe is when we get our large onslaught of revenues that last us through the year. If we didn't have the surplus available, Treasury usually has a hard number of usually like 10% of the overall budget they need back for cash flow. That early gap between expenditures and revenue would need to be filled through STIP payments if we don't have the surplus available. So since we do have a surplus, Treasury is able to make payments throughout the fiscal year, and we don't have to worry about borrowing money for cash flow. But that just kind of gives you an idea of where and when money comes in. When large payments are due, you can see September, December, large payments go out the door. Medicaid, school districts, pension payments, that kind of stuff. So you can see those large payments at the beginning of the fiscal year. Then, obviously, the big revenue influx, March, April, from income taxes being collected in the Commonwealth. We'll blow this up, but this is a chart of the general fund revenue collections for the end of the year. This is a blow up of the top page of our actual tax revenue. The one I want to highlight, two areas I want to highlight. General fund at the very top, right-hand side, grew by 1.2%. And then tax revenue. So general fund revenue is more than just tax revenue, but tax revenue grew just by 0.2%, 0.2%. That's our tax revenue growth year over year for that budget. You can see corporate taxes are down. And that is a result of lowering of the C&I, and we will continue to see corporate tax reductions moving forward, particularly since with the adoption of the corporate tax NOLs and some other things in the tax package this year, you will continue to see corporate taxes reducing. Consumption taxes grew just by 0.8. You can see some growth overall in sales tax, and then you can see a little bit of growth in non-motor vehicle sales tax, and then motor vehicles dropped by 3.3% for the year. Cigarette tax continues to be almost a dead tax. It continues to reduce year over year, so we will continue to see that drop. Personal income tax. Interesting, withholding is the amount of money coming out of individuals' paychecks, grew by 4.4%. The estimated annual, which are mostly like your income tax, business taxes, they're actually in the negative. So your small businesses are on the negative side, where workers are at a growth there by 4.4%. And then non-tax revenue, here's a breakout. So this is the most fascinating part about our revenues last year. Number one, let me go back. Inheritance tax grew by 7.3%. So inheritance tax is the death tax. So when people die, we collect taxes on that. So that was growth opportunity in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So the big question is, did a lot of people die, or a few very wealthy people die, a combination of the two? But to me, that's probably not a good sign of a healthy economy when one of your larger growth revenue sources is the inheritance tax. The other two, and I'll give a lot of credit to our treasurer, Stacy Garrity, for Treasury's investment practices. If you look under miscellaneous, you have Treasury and its cheats. Treasury is their investing of the surplus, budgetary surplus. That has grown over the past 2 years. You can see the percent increase, 72.4. $451.8 million last year, $778.9 million this year. They've done a really good job. Now, as the surplus continues to dwindle, possible Fed movement on interest rates dropping, that number will come down. And that has been a pretty stable revenue source for us. You know, if we kept the surplus intact, we could continue seeing those large amounts of revenue coming in through that. But that will be disappearing over the next year because of the drawdown of the surplus. Nope, I'm going back. Go forward. All right, so overall tax growth, tax refund growth. Tax revenue, again, only grew by 0.2% when compared to the prior fiscal year. One of the top areas of revenue growth was the inheritance tax, and then obviously Treasury investments. Non-tax revenue propped up the general fund for fiscal year 23-24. That's not sustainable moving forward, simply for the fact that the surplus is going to get drained because of the adopted budget for this year and the previous year. So 72% growth year over year. And again, that's dependent on how much money we have. One thing that's not being talked about is actually the tax refunds reserve. Initially set last year at $1.4 billion. By the end of last fiscal year, it was $1.9 billion. And then as of June 30th, 2024, the Department of Revenue set it at $1.8 billion to be paid out. So that is a huge growth, and that's a combination of a potential court case. Actually, we've asked to try to figure out what's going on with this. Is that a new normal of 1.9 because of all the new tax credits programs that have been adopted recently, between increases in EITC, OSTC, the child care tax credit, so a lot of new tax credits. So is this a new normal? Was this a one-time court case with the NOLs? So we still don't have answers whether the 1.9 is a new normal or it will come back to the 1.4 like normalized level. So we don't know moving forward how that will look. So that's something we will continue to keep an eye on. Going back to unspent dollars, so this is a status of appropriations. Just a way to track to see how state agencies are spending. It's a trend line we like to watch. So blue is the amount appropriated, red is how much state agencies spent, and you can see a growing percentage through the past 3 fiscal years of state agencies spending a higher percentage by the end of the year. But it also reflects that, for the last fiscal year, 23-24, 7% wasn't spent. So state agencies are holding on to that 7%. 22-23, 9% was kept by state agencies, and the year before that, 10%. So state agencies are sitting on significant cash reserves and not spending down, which is also one of my pet peeves in budget time when state agencies ask for more money, particularly in their GGO lines. They're not spending all their money, and they're just sitting on cash. Like, you're either spending it and you need it, or you're not spending it and you don't need it. Both can't be true, where you're actually not spending all your money and you're asking for additional dollars. So unspent funds, how much is there in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? So this is a look at last year's, and we will continue to track this for the upcoming fiscal year as well. So at the beginning of last year's budget, state agencies were sitting on, and that's the blue line, the carry forward line, about $4.5 billion. And as you can see, as the fiscal year went on, they actually gained more dollars in their carry forward. That blue line went from 4.5 to roughly 5.5. At the same time, they were spending it down. As you see, available funds were drawing down, as well as the year-to-date expenditures were increasing. I also find it very unique that it was towards the end of the fiscal year that it really jumped up for higher levels of spending of prior year funds. I think everybody would understand some lagging payments in maybe July, August timeframe. State employees' last paycheck in June is going to get paid July timeframe. So I think there's an understanding of lagging payments. But the fact that there's such large payments in April, May, of June of the preceding fiscal year from prior year funds is very questionable at best. And that is the Act 146 waivers that the budget secretary sends out in state agencies. Basically, it allows them to use these dollars for whatever they want, whenever they want. So, good example, probably Governor Shapiro's nonpartisan, or his partisan democracy campaign summer camp that he just did was probably paid out of these funds somehow, some way. So, where are we at for this year's budget and beyond? So here's the financial statement for a couple fiscal years, going back to 23-24. And I think the important number in fiscal year 23-24 is number one, beginning balance, $8 billion. So when Governor Shapiro started office, he had $8 billion available in the general fund surplus. And again, there are two funds. It's the general fund surplus and it's the rainy day fund. They are two distinctly different funds. So one is a balance in the general fund, one-time revenue. The other is money that's deliberately transferred for economic downturns to try to prevent tax increases and sustain programs through economic downturns. So if you look at the end of 23-24, it goes from $8 billion to $6.6 billion. Which means the 23-24 budget was predicated on one-time dollars for recurring costs. So 24-25 budget, you start with $6.6 billion and you end with $3.2 billion, which means $3.4 billion roughly was used to balance this year's budget if this holds up. And then next year's budget, as the IFO points out, in 24-25, you start with 3.2 and you end at negative $1.5 billion. So to balance 25-26 budget using the some pretty conservative estimates on revenue and looking at the spending habits of the Shapiro administration for the past two budgets, actual amount, you're looking at a gap of $1.5 billion you're going to have to come up with revenue for to balance next year's budget. As we've seen the we're looking at a 5.3% increase next year, year over year, continuing for the foreseeable future. And that continues to draw out. So Obviously, this doesn't mention the rainy day fund. Last transfer into the rainy day fund will be 24-25 of $361 million for this fiscal year, and then we're in the negative, in the red for those moving forward. So really the past two budgets are really about unsustainable spending, right? So it's great that you can go out and talk about all the spending. We spent money on this, we spent money on this, we spent money on this, and this, and this, and this, right? So that's what the press releases say. But no one wants to talk about how we're going to continue to funding that level of spending over the next few years. To me, this is very DC budgeting. We're not going to worry about tomorrow. We're just going to continue to print money, and we're going to continue to spend regardless of what happens. Unfortunately, at the state level, we can't print money. Yes, we're blessed to have money in a budgetary reserve, but it's one time. And that one-time money is being used to prop up unsustainable spending habits. So, 24-25 general fund budget spends $47.6 billion, represents an increase of $2.7 billion, or 6% over the prior fiscal year. We know revenue growth last year was 0.2%. So we're outpacing our revenue in the out year. Chairman Powell of the Fed talked about where our economy is moving. And really, I think the takeaway is it's an unknown, right? Inflation's been sticky. We don't know if inflation's going to go down. They're watching it. They're going back to, instead of just solely focusing on fighting inflation, they're looking at the unemployment numbers. So, do we have a weakening economy that's popping back up? I saw a lot of left-leaning kind of Democrat economists talk about the SAM rule with the Fed. And the SAM rule is their best analysis of when a recession is going to begin. It's a 3-year moving average of the unemployment rate. If that hits 0.5, it's the start of a recession. That is at 0.3. Right now, some people are saying, some economists are saying that it will hit 0.5, that SAM rule will hit 0.5 come Friday. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the Fed continues to manage the economy moving forward. I think Chairman Powell said it best, it is an unknown. There's some good economic data out there, and there's some bad economic data out there. So it's going to be a tough time to see which way it's going to break over the next few months on top of a presidential election. Wars popping up on multiple fronts, just a lot happening in the world today. So it's a tough time. So annual growth rate for the general fund spending from fiscal years 2018-19 to 23-24 is 5.9%. Average annual dollar increase of that same time period was $2.2 billion. The IFO 5-year, and that's from the IFO. And then since Governor took office, total general fund spending has been increased $4.6 billion, an average increase of 5.3%. And I would note the 5.3% now is much larger than the 5.9% prior, because that 5.9% on a lower dollar value is a lesser amount. So not in good long-term financial position. So ultimately, the budget surplus is gone. Unless we hit massive revenue increases or the administration decides we're not going to do some drastic spending reductions, budget surplus is gone next year, because you're going to need all of it to prop up spending just to try to get back to where the current levels are. So in basically two approved budgets, the governor has eviscerated $8 billion surplus. And the big question is, what have we gotten for it, right? What did the taxpayers actually get out of blowing through $8 billion in 2 years? Is government running better? Did we solve problems? Is homelessness fixed? Are schools educating kids better? Like, where's the performance measures? Where's the data that says all this money we are spending is actually reaping rewards? Are we on track to gain a congressional seat when we have redistricting? Are we on track to grow our economy? Are we on track to grow our population base? All these data points that Pennsylvania is lagging far behind on, what have we improved during that time with putting all this money into state programs? That is the question that needs to be answered moving forward with this level of spending we are doing. Here's what the IFO has said. General fund surplus likely depleted next year. Again, unless we have a massive influx of revenue or the administration decides we're going to start curtailing spending, that surplus is in debt and gone. You can see the drawdown of the general fund, or the general fund balance at the end of the year, 6.6 to 2.9 to negative 1.5. You see the rainy day fund grow from 6.9 to 7.5 to 7.7. So while we have a healthy rainy day fund, that surplus is completely eviscerated. And again, what did we actually get? What are the taxpayers buying for that level of spending that's unsustainable? Expenditure growth, you can see 5.9% growth, 24-25, 4% 25-26. Net revenues, again, 1.2, 1.6%. Gross revenues, 0.6%, 1.4%. We'll see if we hit those with the uncertain economy moving forward, but that is pretty dismal. So looking at a $1.5 billion deficit next year, how do you close it? So Matt Bradford mentioned, I don't want to touch the rainy day fund. He said that May 6, 2024. Jay Costa, I don't anticipate nor will we be supporting a tax increase next year, right? So if rainy day fund and taxes are off the table, how do you fund budgets next year? So here's our look at the budget using realistic out-year spending, realistic out-year revenues. And you can see the $1.5 billion deficit at the bottom, which is propped up. We do not anticipate taking of the rainy day fund, so you can see that growing in the out years to over $8 billion in the rainy day fund, because this chart does not anticipate at this point any economic decline. So $8.4 billion should be in the rainy day fund in 28-29 to stave off any recessions that may happen in that point of time. But you can see the gap of $9.7 billion between revenue and expenditures in the out years. And this is driving from, seeing a $1 billion increase in education year over year. You're looking at $700 million in DHS spending year over year, which may increase as utilization has increased over the past few years. Everything else, $500 million for all the other state programs and stuff continues to grow. So that is, unless you change policy, this is the path we are on. So how do you fill in that red? Like, what's the goal? If you don't have surplus, you don't raise taxes, and you don't want to use the rainy day fund, what are your options? And I think people need to start thinking about this because June comes around pretty quick around here. So if you don't have a path out of this, you're kind of stuck. So dip into the rainy day fund, right? That's an option. House Democrats no, they don't want to do that. Tax increases. Senate Democrats, they don't want to do that. So sin taxes, Governor Shapiro called for implementation of legalized marijuana in the Commonwealth. You have skill games sitting out there. That's not enough to cover $1.5 billion though, right? So maybe that's a piece of the pie next year. Spending cuts. I haven't seen an appetite for reduction in spending since the Corbett administration. Actually, one budget in the Corbett administration. So that falls back to the typical Harrisburg solution of budget gimmicks. We're going to delay payments. We're going to force businesses to advance revenue in. We're going to bond bond money for operational costs. All those games, we're going to create fake revenue. I look at the JUA, right? Caught $200 million of revenue from multiple budgets that never actually amounted to anything. You had the taverns, small games, a chance. We're supposed to bring in like $10 million, barely brought in $1 million. I think it was in the thousands of dollars of revenue we brought in for that. So the Harrisburg way is, we're going to continue spending recklessly. We're not going to worry about how things are funded. We're just going to do budget gimmicks. And, that's something these credit rating agencies need to really start looking at. I know they hit us last year on, I know one credit rating agency came back and said, if you put billions of dollars into education, you do not come up with a revenue source, we're going to ding you on that. I'm waiting to see if they hold through to that. But it's creating large gaps between spending and revenue, which is financial malpractice. Credit rating agencies should be very, very worried about the long-term financial decisions that the General Assembly has made in these past two budgets and future budgets based on that, because the gimmicks are the easy way to get out of it, where, oh, we didn't raise taxes and we did all this new spending, but creating dire financial concerns moving forward. So budget context. So this is where we've been over the past 20 years. 24-25 fiscal year, we had a $23 billion budget. In 24-25, we had a $47.5 billion budget. People thought the Rendell administration was, spending like drunken sailors. When Wolf took over, and then COVID happened, spending just skyrocketed here in the Commonwealth. And you can see that trend line exponentially increasing year after year when Governor Wolf took office and pushed spending higher and higher and higher. And again, over that time frame, look how much money we went from. 14-15 fiscal year, a $29 billion budget. Today, a $47.5 billion budget. That's a significant increase. And what have we gotten for that? Are things better in Pennsylvania today because we spent billions of dollars on all these programs? Are they actually working? Is it working for the residents of Pennsylvania? So cost drivers. So if you want to know why last year the administration wanted to create a special fund and move the state police offline, now you know. They've moved into a subcategory on the pie chart. We're fighting each other, Charlie.
Sorry, I hit the button.
There we go. All right. So 92% of the budget is education, human services, higher education, corrections, state police, and debt service. Six things in the budget consist of 92% of all the other spending, So other spending, that little orange, there's ag, DEP, DCD, DCNR, health, legislative branch, executive offices, L&I, judiciary, right? 2 whole branches of government are in there. That's where we're at. And human services, a lot of mandated expenses where if you don't change policy, it will continue to grow. K through 12 education, $1 billion year-over-year increases adds up. Like, that is a cost. Corrections. We have a decreasing prison population, but continued increased costs. These things need corrected over time because it's non-sustainable moving forward with the revenue streams and structures we have today. So here's your education spend for the past 13 years. 13 years is, so a kid graduated this year. He started kindergarten in 2011, 2012. I feel really old, but that's the reality of where we're at, 2011, 2012, kindergarten for kids that just graduated this past year. So while they were in school, the education budget went from $9.3 billion to $17.1 billion. That's a significant increase in funding from the state level. How does that look on average? And this is just a fun chart. So this shows a kid in kindergarten graduating, shows the total statewide expenditures. So that is property taxes, federal dollars, and state dollars all combined. So in 2011-12, kid that just graduated, all that funding is $24.7 billion. Statewide average daily membership was 1.7 million students. Statewide average expenditures per ADM is $14,272. Think of that as tuition. So if little Johnny, who was in school, would be $14,200. Student average daily membership dropped to 1.6 million. So negative 0.28% drop in student population during that time. But you know what? Per student funding went from $14,000 to $22,000, $8,000 increase between when Johnny was a kindergartner to when he graduated. Little Johnny From kindergarten to 12th grade, little Johnny costs taxpayers $233,000 to educate them. $233,000 for little Johnny in kindergarten in 2011 until they graduated. $233,000. By the way, $22,000 per statewide average. It's college tuition level expenditures. So you can go to college for that. Last kind of box at the bottom, per classroom, $358,493 per classroom per year. That's about 20 kids per classroom. So if schools have more, cost more, but $358,493 to educate a classroom of kids this year. I think that's a powerful showing how much money we actually put in education and the cost of educating these kids year after year. So again, we come back with, what are we getting out of our education system? So the only real accountability measures we have are standardized tests. How are kids performing? So here's Keystone exam results. So Algebra 1, literature, and biology. And the only data we have is 2015 up to 2023, and magically there's no 2020 data. It's like 2020 never existed. Maybe it'll be in history books someday. I can't wait till my great-great-grandchildren ask me about that, and I'll be like, no, that should be blanked out. It was an awful time for everybody. But anyway, you see the beginning and the end results. Not a lot has changed, you know. I look at the biology Keystone exams back in 2015, where they started and where they're at. Not a lot has changed. You know, advanced dropped down a little bit. I look at Algebra 1 Keystone exam results from 2015. You know, proficient was a lot higher, dropped down, so you have some increase in basic, but then you have a reduction in advanced, and then you have an increase in below basic, you know, kind of a mixed bag there. Statewide literature Keystone exams, proficient, no real changes. You know, where the kind of kids started in 2015, they're still at. So with the billions of dollars we put in education, $233,000 we put into little Johnny's education over the past 13 years of his school, not a lot to show. Very static, very status quo from results that we can actually track on a day-to-day basis. And by the way, all that money we just put in for adequacy, the $1 billion in total education funding, none of that went to none of that money was directed to anything that actually improves education. It was a blank check to school districts. So what are they going to do with the money? They're going to build new buildings. They'll do pay increases probably for staff, maybe for administrators, right? We're going to have new shiny objects. They're going to put it back in the reserve funds. Ask Commonwealth Foundation. They track reserve funds every single year. Ask the Department of Education. School districts are sitting on more reserve funds today than they ever have. That will continue to grow. They will put money back in their reserve funds. So is it going to go to programs that actually will benefit students and drive student achievement? Yet to be seen. But there's no mandate for any school district to do that. So one would think it's going to be very status quo, and we're going to continue until we mandate that. And I brought it up on the House floor. You know, the whole basic education funding report that the Democrats put out. They looked at the 75 best school districts. They just looked at how much they spent. They didn't ask, what did you do to drive student success? And even my good friend Jordan Harris on the floor responded, we just want to put money in the system. You know, at some point we'll have to look at programs, but don't you want to do that first? Figure out what works and what that costs, instead of we're just going to throw money at the problem and hopefully somebody figures it out. So as you can see, the data we can collect and track, not great. Just very blah status quo, kind of like Pennsylvania's demographics and everything else. All this money that we have spent over the past decades have not resulted in any kind of real change for Pennsylvania, advancing it anywhere on any data points. So with that, fun and exciting news. I know everybody's very happy for out-year budgeting and finances. I get excited about it. Probably nobody else does, but I'll open up to any questions anybody has. Questions? Don't know. You'll have to ask them. Yeah, the question was, why did Senate, if things are heading dire, it's not looking good, why did Senate Republicans agree to this budget? Don't know. You have to ask them. We were not included in any discussions. Although I will say, House Republicans carried votes for things we were involved in. We were involved in the PDMs. We carried votes for that. We were involved in the higher education stuff. We carried votes for that. We were involved with the non-preferred appropriations. We carried those. So if you include people, we come to play. I don't know. Sometimes I think budgets have consequences.
Yeah, that's going to be another question. I don't know how closely they included you.
Yeah.
You know, Pittman's people.
Oh, they didn't ask. Yeah. That was all the Senate Republicans. It's their baby. Yeah, you'll have to ask them.
We got one online.
All right. Taylor, go ahead.
Sorry, it was on mute. When it comes to this budget deficit and the spending, how do you convince the governor's office to go along with doing cuts, particularly if it's in Democrat hands versus in Republican hands?
That's a great question. And, I think history serves for the solution. I think we're all aware Governor Shapiro was a county commissioner walking into a structural deficit as a county commissioner. His budget guru at Montgomery County is our budget guru at the state. Our budget secretary, Yuri, he was there for both. And they did zero-based budgeting. They were able to squeeze the kind of waste, the stuff that's just been in there for long, isn't doing anything. They got rid of programs that didn't work and reinvested in programs that did work. They did zero-based budgeting and were able to close a structural deficit larger than the states at the time, by the way, without raising taxes, from what we can tell, without really doing budget gimmicks, but they used common sense to do it. They asked the question, what works, what doesn't work? Department heads come back with performance measures. How are these programs working? Do we need them? Are these programs even in the core function of what you're doing? So really, the work that the governor has done as a commissioner to do something similar, that's the path forward. Yes, it takes more work. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's not easy. But at the end of the day, you're going to get better results for the taxpayers and the citizens of this Commonwealth without the added costs and without the added burdens. Listen, we do incremental budgeting, right? So all these numbers are on top of each other. There's no real rhyme or reason. Some of the stuff in DHS I can point back to like utilization throughout the year and stuff. But generally, we're just throwing money on top of throwing money for the sake of throwing money on top of money because that's incremental budgeting. We don't ask why you need it or if you need it. It's just, okay, we're just going to throw some more money on top of it and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. I view it as very lazy budgeting, and I think we need to move away from it. It just has not served this Commonwealth very well. So to answer your question, it's really not what cuts are you going to make. It's going back and asking the questions we should be asking at budget time. What works and what doesn't work? And listen, the administration's budget process is starting now for next year. Those blanks from the budget office are going to go out to state agencies. And the budget secretary and the Josh need to start asking those questions and start building in zero-based budgeting now so it's ready when he releases his budget so we have a better understanding and we can do hearings next year predicated on zero-based budgeting rather than this incremental budgeting process. I'd rather ask the hard questions than the gotcha questions because it'll do a better service to the Commonwealth, I think, moving forward. And it's going to be a collaborative process. And again, it's going to be a lot of work. I get that. But if you start the work now, we'll have a better product, and this will go away. That's the big thing. If you do zero-based budgeting, all of this just goes away, and you still will fund education. You'll have corrections. You'll fund those things that are core values of this Commonwealth. You just do it better and put the money where it needs to go.
Is there anything you know that isn't working right now that you would cut in out years? I mean, if you had,
So for me, like, right.
Had unilateral
Right. Hypothetically, I mean, we still have a BRAC program at DCD. The last time BRAC was mentioned, that's base realignment and closing. The last time anybody mentioned that was Barack Obama was president of the United States. Why are we spending money on those type of programs? Secretary of DCD this budget year said, I did a complete review of all of our programs under DCD, and I found ones that don't work, and he refused to give us an answer on one. So we know stuff doesn't work in DCD, right? Let's look at Department of Aging. We know for a fact they are failing their core missions, right? So if we start getting these agencies refocused on the core mission and get rid of all the shiny objects, think about just Ed Rendell. Every year Ed Rendell came out with a new program, right? Corbett would come out with a new program. Governor Wolf came out with a new program. Nobody's reviewed those, quote, new programs to see if they actually worked. The PA Sites program this year. We have other programs that do that exact same thing. So if we just put $500 million into a sites program, why do we have any other program that does site work, right? It's just simple common sense things to say, why are we spending money on duplicative programs time and time again? Streamline it, find the one that works, fund that, move forward. That's what performance-based budgeting, that's what zero-based budgeting does for you. It does the heavy lifting so you can go back to people and say, I understand you like that program, but it wasn't working, but this program over here does something very similar. We put money into that. It works, right?
How much do you think inflation does play a role in a lot of these increases that we've seen?
Right, so good question. What role does inflation play in a lot of these increases? I think it has had a detrimental impact on the citizens in the Commonwealth. I think you can see that in the reduction in car purchases, right? I mean, we got people today that are really struggling just to make it work, right? McDonald's and Starbucks are having financial problems right now. I don't know if you saw that news. Like, people aren't buying a $5 coffee, and people aren't going to McDonald's. McDonald's scares me more than anything else because I don't want to say it's the low, but it's like the cheapest of the, I'm trying to be nice to McDonald's, like the cheapest of the fast food, right? I mean, my kids love McDonald's. I don't want to be mean to McDonald's, right? But I mean, that sends a message. The average citizens are like, McDonald's becomes a luxury. It's not those quick hits anymore. So from a revenue sense, we picked up, inflation is good on regular sales tax because price of goods increases. So as price of goods at 6% provides more revenue. So for a sense from revenue, it's a good thing. But people are also buying less. And then people will buy less tax, because remember, we don't tax really the necessities in sales tax. So generally, like, food isn't taxed, hot meals are. So like, you don't pick it up on if people are reducing their spending and focusing on necessity stuff, you're not growing your revenue through that. And then if people aren't spending, businesses start ramping down. It's like that cycle. So it has had a huge detrimental impact on us. I think what we're starting to see is the depletion of pandemic level savings. And then you see the credit card start, the balances are the highest ever. You're starting to see more defaults. So that's kind of that negative news we're seeing, but we still have like that strong labor market. So that's why it's a very confusing economic time. But for state agencies, purchasing, it's a more cost to purchase stuff. But at the same time, these state agencies, that's not moving. Oh, there we go. At the same time, these state agencies are asking for more money because of inflation, but yet they're not spending their allocation. Both can't be true. I need more money, but I'm not spending my money, right? So that's kind of where we're at, but inflation does play a role in a lot of this stuff. But it can be managed at the government level and stuff like that. And listen, more government spending is going to lead to more inflation. Inflation came because of all the stimulus money from the federal government. They definitely overdid it. All right. Taylor, go ahead.
How do you convince the state agencies to spend the money that they're holding on to?
Maybe a little joke, like, go spend money, right? Here's the thing. Here's the kicker. So one good thing I think the Senate Republicans did this budget was force state agencies to spend money from prior years. So a lot of the governor's ask for IT upgrades and stuff came at them spending prior year funds. You have to go back and say, listen, if you want these one-time things, go spend your prior year funds and start draining them. That's how you do it. And then at budget time, hold them accountable. Like, ask them, why are you holding back on this money? What are you spending these dollars on? And again, I'll go back, look at the out years, or the within the budget. I mean, it's a little spending up front, so July and August, which you would expect, right? There's some hangover costs from the prior fiscal year that need paid off. But really, it should be shut down by October. There shouldn't be any more prior year funds. It should all lapse back to the general fund thereafter for these state agencies. But as you see, as the fiscal year continues, they spend more and more and more and more and more. Up until the last 2 months of the fiscal year, they're spending more and more of their prior year funds. Why? Right? Why are they doing that? And you know, they're still sitting on billions of dollars. Why? What is the purpose of that? Outside of they have some slush funds to hold pizza parties and democracy summer camps. So it's really the accountability at the budget table, and then they need to have a priority. Actually, I remember when the governor was Attorney General's office, I still hit agencies hard on their unspent dollars, and he actually commented to me once. He's like, "We're doing better on our prior year dollars. We're spending them down." So they just need to continue to spend them down, because it's not like they need them for cash flow, because that's at the Treasury. They just draw down the money, so it's not like they need money sitting there for cash flow or anything. So there's no real need for it.
And you said that this budget requires them to spend
Some, yeah.
down some of those funds in
Right.
exchange for new appropriations?
Yes, yeah. So not really for new appropriations. There was some IT, there was some stuff in the budget that the state agencies wanted. So they required the budget office and the governor to kind of do their own spending, the prior year funds, to start drawing those down. I thought that was really good in trying to manage all this. So we should see less, so at the end of the next year, really the goal is this chart that 93% should be higher. You want to get that as close to 99 to 100% as you can. Or if they're not spending it, return it, right? Let's go back to that first chart. You know, if state agencies, if we rescind funding after this fiscal year, and maybe we give them 2 months or October, you know, we're at a budget surplus, right? If they only actually spent $41.97 billion and we have $43.59 billion of revenue, that's a surplus. But that's not how they operate, because they take that delta gap and they plug it back in. We shouldn't have to use any of the surplus this year. Think about that. None of the surplus should be used to balance this year's budget based on the actual expenditures of the state government through June. And obviously there's going to be a little bit lag, right? If you go back to this chart, a little bit lag of July and August, right? But, you know, that's not we could deal with that, you know, some legacy payments and stuff like that. It's a simple management tool that the administration could do today. We could have a balanced budget, we could have a surplus, and we could save those surplus dollars for another day and extend them out. But that is a decision this administration makes and previous administrations made.
Does this total include, is this total only agencies that are primarily general fund funded, or does it include?
Yeah, that's just general fund. Yeah. So if you go to the treasurer's website, there'll be like prior year funds. They're not really prior year funds. It's basically, so all the special funds will be sitting on cash as well. A lot of them have a kind of a checking account and a savings account. So even like the transportation trust funds sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars. So like that's a whole other can of worms.
Which is something that Democrats say they want to return to in September.
Right. transportation. So that's a big thing. Like, so we're scheduled back September 23rd. Obviously, that is the bipartisan softball game. The special elections are held September 17th. Now, I don't know if Philadelphia have pre-certified the winners, but it usually takes maybe a little more than 6 days to certify an election to come back for the 23rd. So 17th to 23rd, that's less than 7 days. Now, for the Democrat special elections, it's been amazing. Like 1 week, week and a half, they've had those bad boys certified. Republican special elections, you know, maybe they'll get around to that eventually. Ours took a little while to get certified magically. So I suspect it's going to be a very quick certification process to Philadelphia seats, but is it actually going to hit that week? Like, are we actually going to be in at a 100-100 tie? We need 101 to pass anything for that week, right? So that week's out. So, you know, maybe you get 2 days of voting there based on certifications. And then you have, you know, October. Like, so you got 6 days of the House being in session. So SEPTA's unfunded, right? I mean, they got like $50 million from this year's budget. Governor had to use his own money for that again. So, you know, they're in a world of hurt, and that's a top priority of the Shapiro administration. So is that actually going to get done this fall? You know, that's a whole other negotiation. That's tied to skill games. It's not an easy thing to get all those gaming entities on board. Or is SEPTA going to go unfunded and, you know, it's going to be mass cuts? I mean, Philadelphia school kids use SEPTA to get to school. You know, so it's a big deal in the Southeast, and it was a big failure of the Shapiro administration not to get that done, and House Democrats.
Is that all tied together? The transit funding and skill games, is that part of the grand bargain?
Yeah, as far as I know, that's something Joe Pittman said. They wanted to fund SEPTA with skill game money. So that is something that's been tied together budget table wise. Now, I don't know if the administration can unwind that, but that seems to be the linkage.
What do you think the prospects of that getting done in the fall are?
Big gaming bill, 6 days. You know, if they meet every day for 12 hours, they can probably get there. It's a tough, it's, right. Oh. Right. That's a good question. It's a good question for the governor's office, Bradford's office, and Pittman's office. But yeah, those are kind of like the two legacy things that are kind of still out there on I think leftover that the budget didn't happen. So did I answer all of Taylor's questions? Do you have any more questions, Taylor? None. All right. Anybody else? Good. Yeah. Shapiro, Vice President. I don't know. Good luck. Not my decision. Listen, everybody's got baggage. You know, he's not Governor Roy Cooper, who has a Republican lieutenant governor, right? He's automatically out of the race. We'll see. Supposedly, I guess Kamala's going to pick a vice president in Philadelphia, so I think there's some assumption it's going to be Josh. You know, there's a report where I guess something with the financial investment people in New York, like they can't donate to a governor after a certain date, so Kamala's administration asked, signaling it's going to be a governor. We'll see. Like he's got baggage. Like I support his stance on Israel and anti-Semitism. That's not where the Democratic Party's at today, right? So he's got problems with them. School choice community. I mean, both sides hate him. You know, he's out there calling for school choice. So teachers union, public school advocates hate him for that. He vetoed school choice and hasn't gotten it done, so the school choice people aren't happy. So, you know, that's a hit. The entire sexual harassment thing is propping up. That's becoming a problem. So, I don't know. You know, Pennsylvania is a swing state. I don't know if he wants it, right? You know, obviously, I think he does want to be president of the United States at some point. So vice president's a stepping stone getting there, but now you're tied to Kamala Harris, right? And everything that she does if she wins for 4 to 8 years, right? So she's president for 8 years. Is he still going to be viable after that 8 years as a vice president, her vice president? You know, if she's 2 and out, he can't. He's still 8 years out because it's not like he's going to run against her in a primary upon reelection. So I don't know. Pros and cons. I don't know. You know, the big question is if he accepts it. Like if he's actually offered it, does he accept it? Thinking, playing that out. He's not a dumb guy. He gets politics. Like timing wise, where I want to be in a few years. So we'll see.
Do you think if you accepted it for the 3 months of campaigning, would that have an impact on Pennsylvania? Would there be calls for resigning at all? Or y'all more looking just at November and what it would look like after that?
I don't think it'll have any impact. I mean, listen, we're in very few days, if any. I think it'll take away from the activity. I think if he's running around the country as vice president, I don't think you're going to see SEPTA funding or any major thing happening. Like his office might be engaged, but they're all going to be focused on more national issues. So Pennsylvania play a subside. So probably less will happen in the fall, you know, more than anything else. And then, you know, we'll see what happens after the election, you know, if he's selected and if Kamala wins, or if not, he's back here just being governor, dealing with this wonderful deficit that his budgets have created. So, you know, I mean, he comes back, he deals with this deficit. If he goes to D.C., he deals with the bigger deficit. One, you can print money. The other, good luck.
Have you guys been, or to your knowledge, have people been closely working with Austin in a situation where Austin now is, you know, becomes governor? Is he going to be able to
Yeah.
into the whole budget?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's working. So the question was if Austin becomes, you know, governor, has anybody been working? I don't know. I assume he may take on more of the PR duties if the governor's gallivanting across the country. But yeah, that's something you'll probably have to ask him. You know, as far as like, he's never known as a bomb thrower. He was easy to work with. You can talk to him. I personally like Austin Davis a lot. He's a good dude. I think he's less political than the governor. I don't think he has ambitions of grandeur, being president of the United States and stuff like that. I think you can have conversations with him. I'm a pretty conservative guy. I think I can have conversations with him in a rational way. So, all right. That's it. Anything else online? All right, we'll let you get back to reporting on vice presidents and presidents. Hope you enjoyed this little overview of the dismal collapse of our budget situation, and hopefully it will improve. Probably doesn't look like that, but we can all pray. So enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you, I guess, at a softball game on September 23rd.